That's your precedent.
I think it was the only person that thought moral relativism was okay. I figured somebody else would be able to articulate it better than me. That's why I said.
That's what my hand was up for.
Yeah, I know. No, I think there are things that seem to be objective truths, like the murder of children or something horrible, right, is wrong. But I think everybody that's not nuts thinks that's bad. And so it's still relative, where these things that are more wishy-washy, like, I don't know, somebody give me a good example that might or might not be wrong. Like marijuana or eating or something like that, eating to over excess. That is relative. But these major wrongs, everybody thinks is bad. Even people that do bad things know they're bad. I read this book called Killer, by this guy named Carl Panzeram, and he just murdered and raped anybody he could. But he knew it was bad, and he got away with it. But people like that, they know it's bad, they just don't care. But they know it's bad. That's why I believe in relativism.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I mean, I guess to me a good example, you know, what is bad, like, is, or I guess maybe how subjective it is, like, some people, like, horribly object to killing animals for meat, and they would consider that as murder. And that would be as just horrible as killing children. So I don't really know if there is any really fair example of something that is just absolutely, completely wrong all the way across the board.
Okay.
I'm going to give a swing, maybe something that I've formulated, and it's probably poor at best. But I'm going to put on the moral relativism hat, and I'm going to try. Imagine a reductio ad absurdum. So I'm trying to reduce something to absurdity to show that my point's right. I'm going to attack moral objectivism. I'm going to say the apparent emergent moral subjectivity in the thesis that's anthropologically pervasive, meaning namely that we point to societies and our world and show that none of them have acquisitioned any kind of objective morality, and the best approach is maybe the United Nations common morality or even philosophical common morality. And even that's relative. So the moral relativist wants to turn around and say, hey, all of this varying is just more for me. Ha-ha, at your moral objectivism. I've got quite the amount of proof on my side. It's living on every borderline you look at. Is that bad? I don't know where I'm going with that. Anybody want to take that on?
There's a lot to say. Let me give Tyler a chance to lead off.
Well, I'm just wondering for those who are solidly not relativists, how do you know that a principle is morally universal? What evidence, what support do you have?
That actually leads in nicely. I was thinking, to me, relativism, people treat it as the opposite of moral realism. But I think there's actually a third option, which is nihilism, which is just that there is no moral.
That's Spinoza's view. He said there's no really any qualification of good or evil. Yeah. In the world, there's no good or bad.
So I don't think the argument against relativism is that you have to prove there is, or there isn't. I think just you have to argue against relativism itself.
So being a nihilist is sufficiently different than being a relativist. Is just a valid third option?
I don't know. I'm wondering, is relativism even coherent? To me, it seems like it's nihilism, but you're just saying, I feel, it's like emotivism, you feel that this is wrong.
Let me suggest one thing that might help. I am definitely trying to be a little bit narrow in how I put relativism on the table and give those two footnotes. There is a recent ethical anthology that came out by Oxford University Press. It's edited by David Kopp, who's the philosophy chairperson over at UC Davis. And this came out just 2 years ago. There's an article in there, if you're interested in like a longer discussion, called Relativism and Nihilism, where the author tries to think through whether relativism and nihilism are the same thing. He argues that they're distinct, whether one of them ends up kind of supporting the other one or being better than the other one or somehow resting on similar assumptions. But the way I framed it here, I kind of gave the bend to relativism being different than nihilism. In other words, some people think relativism is the thesis that there just are no moral obligations, period. The way I was trying to propose it is, there are moral obligations, but they're always relative to like a culture or an individual or something that kind of is going to make morality different for different people. So in some ways, the opposite of relativism, on this way of understanding it, is not realism, right? Because the relativist is a kind of realist. Rather, the opposite of relativism on this way of pushing it forward is something like universalism. Like, there are universal moral principles that make it obligatory for everybody to do something or to not do something. So, I mean, maybe that's a contentious way of putting it out there. Okay, you might have a different definition of relativism, but I'm trying to at least carve out that that's my main target. I'll try to sort of lay low on these conversations so you guys can bounce off each other more.
I had something to say, but first I think this gentleman down here, whose name I don't know, also had something to say.
Oh, me?
Yeah, what's your name, sir?
Ryan.
Hello, Ryan.
I totally forgot what I was going to say.
Oh,
I
okay.
was too interested in that, so you got it.
Okay. In answer to what Tyler asked about how we would define an objective moral truth, right? Is that what you're saying? I don't know how you would define that, but I do think that it is possible to point to some things that almost everyone is going to agree are wrong, like, at the risk of derailing the conversation, female genital mutilation. I went there, oh no.
Well, but we do perform male circumcision in America, and so
Yeah, but
that's an issue that I
it's
always
not quite the
kind
same thing.
if you were to go to a culture that practices female circumcision, you would find that it's not, something that all women of that culture sit there and say, oh, I wish that this hadn't happened to me. There are women who voluntarily go through the process. It's performed by other women in their culture. They come together. It's something that they are happy and proud to go through because it's a form of their passing on into adulthood. And so I would say that that's something that maybe we're too far away from to really understand whether or not that's, I mean, do you really have the experience to say this is right or wrong? I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's shaky.
I'm
I
Ryan.
forgot your name. Is it Mario?
Ryan.
Ryan. Okay, you're Ryan. Oh,
Yeah. That was just so interesting. How are we defining, like, because I know, like, are we talking about, like, suffering? Like, I mean, I guess, I almost feel like it's almost in my head, like, defining evil and, like, good, but I'm trying to, like, narrow. I'm not trying to get worried.
I can narrow it.
Yeah.
Perhaps. One way that people begin a distinction in ethical theory is by distinguishing your theory of the good from your theory of the right. So your theory of the good is sometimes called value theory and tends to focus on which states of affairs are good and which states of affairs are bad, like intrinsically. So sometimes people say things like this: pleasure is intrinsically good, pain is intrinsically bad or evil, friendship is intrinsically good, ignorance is intrinsically bad or evil. Okay, that's one way of carving it up. But the other part of morality, which is kind of the part I was focusing on in my remarks, is your theory of the right. In other words, the focus here is not so much on states of affairs, like friendship or pleasure or ignorance or knowledge. Rather, the focus here is on the realm of actions. And so you're asking which actions are right in the sense of morally permissible, which actions are wrong in the sense of morally impermissible. And there's other ways you can divide up that part of morality. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'm just trying to break it down in my head.
Preston and Nessie.
Isn't it an essential feature of an ethical theory that it be resultant in some kind of decision procedure, right? That you have this kind of start premise of how you're going to go about taking into consideration your moral actions. So for moral relativism, it's relative to certain societies that they killed their grandparents, parricide, they killed the older generations. Just because they find it necessary to do so or beneficial to society or whatever justification may be, whereas maybe in our society we would disagree with it. But because it is permissible and sometimes even a requirement, they go about doing the moral action based on anthropological, necessarily anthropologically relative features of society. So that's whenever you've got death with dignity in some places, and then in others it's completely unheard of, and even morally impermissible because killing a life is just a no-no no matter what. So for me, there's the meta-ethical consideration of, well, you know, are morals objective or subjective, and then there's the actual feature. It's purporting to do something, and that is to help us achieve some kind of consideration or you know, to actually perform an action when considering something. And for a relativist, it would be do what's, you know, relative to that culture. So whenever I went to Tahiti and I was smoking pot, that was not right. I should not have done that. It was illegal there, but under California law, and given my prescription, I'm allowed to do it. Still federally illegal, I know, but so it didn't make my action right. But if a Tahitian would come over here and it were, better example, there was a 9-year-old who got drunk in Tahiti on accident. The waiter just assumed that he wanted to drink. Okay, that was an underlying cultural assumption he made, and that 9-year-old fell off the table and not even 2 drinks. Like, he made it through the first, and it was like, Mom, I feel good. Boom, just fell off the table. He got hurt, and we were like, why is this kid going from completely cognizant to slurred speech and falling off the table? Well, to them, it was relative. Feed him some alcohol. Shut the kid up. That's probably what they were thinking, because he was really loud. But to us, we were morally deplorable at best. You would have mothers flying off their leashes at soothing everything. But over there, it was kind of like, and we laughed with it too, even though Mom was pissed about it. So there was a decision procedure, feed the 9-year-old alcohol. Whereas here it would be, don't feed the 9-year-old alcohol, no matter what. So there's a decision procedure, and we all want to say fundamentally we don't agree with their disagreement, right? So we want something to be more objective or more revealing than that, or something more stable in a decision procedure. Not just, okay, well, while in Rome, as you have mentioned in your example here. How do we reconcile that? There's so many features to that we want to say, well, if we're taking it only on the anthropological principle, which is what most ethicists will do, they will divide and conquer that way. Say it's, well, if it's relative to the anthropological data, none of it's coherent or convergent enough for us to get any kind of exacting principle, discard it. Well, that doesn't help the meta-ethical considerations, nor it just really puts it in a shoebox and files it away. And we are striving for this moral ideal while still palpating this subjectivity. I'll stop you there. Sorry about that.
Good comment. So do you want me to answer?
Yeah, so you're saying the scope of the anthropological type. It varies from culture to culture, namely, and there are specific decision procedures given to the relative cultures that make the moral permissibility or impermissibility respectively. And it sets that value. Most people would agree that that seems like what it is, but we strive for that ideal. Do you agree with that, or does anybody else disagree with that? So we want there to be a moral objective or moral ideal, but you had mentioned this previously that we also don't want to step on the feet of the subjective, because we still recognize that in its parsing out of the duties of uncovering and unveiling an objective morality, if there be one, that we have to let it do its duty as well. We can't be mad at it. So either we're missing a large piece of the perceptual puzzle when it comes to breaking apart morality, or MR, moral relativism, is kind of crazy. Anybody want to assist me in that? philosophy theory, you shut down the whole room.
I kind of lost track of what you were saying there. Could you sum it up a little?
I can also add something too. I believe that you are right to point to the importance of a decision procedure. You say that all moral theories try to do that, and I think that that's close, because some moral theories are a little more modest in not giving you a decision procedure, like here's how to decide what's the right thing for you to do. Some moral theories try to say, I'm not sure I can give you that, but I will try to give you what they call a truth maker. So in other words, I think that the true theory of morality is that whichever action is going to produce the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people over time, that's the right action. But when you ask somebody who says that, well, okay, how should I handle this particular problem I'm dealing with? They might be like, I don't know, because you might not be in a position to know how different actions are going to affect different people over time. So that would be a case where you're putting forward a truth maker for a moral theory. In other words, is this, whatever action is the greatest amount of production of good, but you're not actually recommending that they choose A over B, because you just don't know whether A or B is going to produce more good in the long run. Now, let's see, I was going to also chime in with the same thing you did on, I want to say your name is Katie?
Kate.
Kate, okay. Your point about how do you stand by the idea of trying to respect other people's differences and be tolerant of other people's differences if you are convinced that morality is not relative. And I think one common response to that is the whole principle of respect, or giving people the space to make up their own mind, or giving people the freedom to even live out their convictions. Okay, there's different ways of doing that, but those principles themselves are sometimes flamboyantly defended by non-relativists. In other words, they want to say, look, it's a universal obligation for everybody, whether they're living up to it or not, to try to give people the space to make up their own mind. So, in one sense, that's an answer. And on a practical level, I think that oftentimes you may find yourself in conversations where people are going to feel like you are being too pushy with them because you're giving what you think is the correct view of the matter, like the morally correct view, and it ends up stepping on people's toes because, well, that's not the way I've chosen to live my life, or bring up my kids, or organize my society. And so I think perhaps one of the ways of trying to lessen that offensiveness and that, how should I put it, people sometimes feel like ethics is very invasive because you're meddling with other people's stuff, like the stuff that matters to them. You're stepping on their toes, or whatever. One way to try to dampen that is to make the distinction between individuals and their properties. In other words, an individual is one thing, but the properties that they have of believing things or doing things or having certain kinds of histories or being members of certain kinds of communities is another thing. And though this is controversial, it seems to a lot of people possible to have one attitude of regard and respect